So what did Darius learn from these events? Well, that's part of how we know what the critique is that God has offered to this Gentile king. He says, peace be multiplied. This is verse 25. Peace be multiplied to you. I should start verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth. So now he issues not a decree, but it's a decree, but not with a new law. And he says, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. Right? So he's now advising his people on a new value they should have. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel and from the power of the lions. All right? So what does Darius learn? Well, Darius learns the sobering lesson that however noble a principle of government is, a form of government or principle of law, however much of a improvement it might seem across the board, something is the rule of law being so fundamental, something like democracy or a republic being generally a preferred form of government, does not mean that it will actually transform by itself as some sort of recipe the people within that society to become more just and more holy. So what Darius witnessed was that God alone has the power, in this case, Daniel's God has the power to overcome the nature of the world in its fallen state, the nature of the lions, the nature of the evil in man. That Daniel himself could become more just. How? By trusting this God, by obeying his word, by fearing him. That is to say, by having a respect where we hold God as the highest authority and as the highest value at actually having the power to transform and society and making us into better people. Now, the contrast, of course, for Darius was with his own people, who were the high officials in the government, that they proved to be irredeemably evil, despite all of their Persian education into these principles of government, these values, the principle of the rule of law. Actually, they were still irredeemably evil, where they could have chosen differently. And so they, of course, end up being judged and thrown into the den of lions and get devoured by the lions at the end of the story. So these, anyway, are takeaways, lessons from Darius about what government actually has the value, the eternal values to persevere. Now listen, the Persian Empire endured a lot longer than the Babylonian Empire. What would it be? 4 or 5 times longer than the Babylonian Empire. And one of the reasons for that is because of the principle of the rule of law. So do not misunderstand the critique. The Persians actually were, remember in the statue that Daniel saw, that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, the Persians were a stronger metal, the silver, which is stronger than gold, the Babylonians. They did persevere and endure longer, in part because of their principle of government. So it was an advancement. There's really no debate about this. The question is whether any principle of government, any principle of law is sufficient to overcome the evil in human nature and transform people into a truly just society. It may endure longer, but it can actually, by its very principle, its very form of government, though it was an advancement, could actually be used to accomplish greater evil than the Babylonians ever accomplished. So there is a divine, or rather a cultural irony in that idea. So next we turn to Daniel chapter 7 and the visions. The next 4 chapters, the final 4 stories, are 4 visions. But let's just be honest here that things get harder as we turn. They also get more interesting as we turn into the final 4 stories of the book. But let this inspire you, which is that Jesus referred to the book of Daniel at least a couple of times. Paul refers back to events from the book of Daniel one very famous time. And of course, the book of the Revelation refers at numerous points to the book of Daniel. But in all of these examples, Jesus, Paul, the book of the Revelation, Jesus preeminently, of course, refers to things from these final 4 visions in the book of Daniel. This is the part of the book that Jesus actually focused on. So we don't want to punt on just because things get a little bit more complex. Okay? We want to look at the visions straight up and confront them and actually try to understand them. And the good news is that because the New Testament talks about these visions, we can use the things in the New Testament as a kind of answer key to guide us in our own interpretation of Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9, and so on. So the question we have just for now, just to worry about, is fairly simple. We know that in the first half of Daniel, we have this story, chapter 2, which is the story of the Colossus, the dream, the statue, the giant statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. And that is going to answer here to chapter 7, which is the vision of the 4 beasts. There were 4 metals. Now there are 4 beasts. Okay? And what we want to do is just talk, or rather think about, so you got to go back and read Daniel 2 and that vision, and what's the same and what's different. Okay? What's the same and then what is different between the 2 visions. Okay? Just start with that. Don't try to interpret all the meaning of the vision. I mean what's different in the very image of the statue, the Colossus in chapter 2, versus the vision that Daniel sees in chapter 7. Just compare and contrast the visions. Don't try to go into the actual interpretation of what it all might mean. Just the vision, what he saw, what's the same and what's different. All right? So, best wishes, and we'll talk to you next time.